Launching in the US market in 2022. Hi guys, I'm Syama here, CEO of Scaling Retail. And with US consumers having saved about $2 billion in their bank accounts over the last 18 months or so, it's no surprise that most people are really excited to get in front of that consumer and take a piece of their heart and a piece of their pocketbook. But how we go about launching brands in the US has changed quite a bit in the last few years. And as we're looking to expand or even launch for the first time in the US market, there are a few things that are really important to consider. Number one, it's not easy. When we take a look at what it takes to successfully build a brand in the US, we really have to ask ourselves, how in touch are we with the core needs of how consumers want to be engaged with? It's very important to ask yourself, how am I building up my perceived value? How do people understand my product? How am I building community? It's not quite as easy as saying, I have a great product. Let me just open up a website, fund that website, have product, and then just assume I'm going to be able to get traffic to that site. It's also not enough to say I have a great collection. Let me take my line sheets and my lookbooks and just shop them around to buyers and assume that they're going to buy without having any sort of social proof or community or growth behind the brand. So as we're looking at what it takes to be successful in the US market, there are a few key areas that I think are very important. Number one, understanding cultural trends in the US. That means, what are the topics and conversations that are really relevant to your core consumer here domestically? Certainly there might be some overlap with your core consumer or where you're from. However, the way in which Americans and the way in which they dialogue, engage with product, how they are in the forefront of conversation is so important to be actively engaged with and certainly to take a position on. Whether or not it's something you're actively posting about on Instagram, your ethos and your values and your mission become at the core of how we look at content planning, event activations, brand partnerships, collaborations, etc. So understanding the cultural values of who you want to target becomes very important. Understanding what pieces of content are they reading? What are the publications, right? Understanding what kinds of pieces of content they're responding to in terms of images, right? Copy, etc. So understanding cultural influence, I think, is probably one of the most important things that I see brands and business owners miss the mark on, right? They might have a great product, but they haven't built up enough social proof. They haven't invested into their communication strategy, and they haven't invested into the content to be able to showcase that they have resonance with that community or with that audience here domestically in the United States. So that takes time, right? Cultural adaptations, being able to have that influence, being able to be a part of those conversations. You want to give yourself about 6 months to a year of building up conversation, right? Standing for something. Then the next step of that is obviously the ways in which you're choosing to engage with the market from a selling capacity. Certainly making sure that your website, right, has the right cultural inflections and nuances that are going to feel appropriate for the US market, right? There's a certain language, nomenclature, how we do things, right? Adopting those certain lifestyle changes to how your brand engages is going to help to have resonance. Now, it's a little different if your brand is kind of really known for being, let's say, very Scandinavian, right? Or being very French or having a very British way of approaching things. And you're building up provenance in being domestically authentic. Then obviously the way you translate that brand, because region is provenance to you, you're going to express that in a way that's maybe more aspirational, maybe sometimes more elevated, maybe educational, depending on what you're trying to communicate with your audience. So it's not to say you have to become American, so to speak, to sell to Americans, but you need to understand how your cultural and regional provenance is going to actually translate to the other market, right? And what role and what perception are you giving off? And be able to have a one-to-one understanding of, is it a match? Is it different? And how do I kind of close the gap between what I stand for and where I want to be? Now, looking at branding aside and looking at cultural context aside, we then start to think about physicality, right? Where is your brand physically going to take place and shape? Is it that you're going to be participating in pop-up shops? Is it that you're going to be selling to retail stores? Are you going to be hosting trunk shows? How are you physically going to be manifesting your brand? And that, I think, is an important component that not a lot of international brands sometimes think about, right? The need to be on the ground, the need to come to the US to have desk sides with publicists, with editors, the need to host an influencer dinner in order to have people get to know you. Because you are not on the ground all the time, those key moments, maybe 4 times a year, where you're here for trade shows, you're here to meet with buyers, you're here to meet with press, influencers, attend a few markets, those become super critical. So start to really plan out your on the ground time with how you're looking at engaging with the market. If you're not here, it's hard to have a presence, right? It's hard for people to get to know you. It's hard for people to really feel the essence of your brand. And ultimately, as a brand owner, guys, you are front facing, right? So develop an on the ground, boots on the ground strategy in terms of how you plan on really representing. Now, the last thing that is super important is how you really look at operations and logistics. Where are you going to be shipping from, right? Do you plan on having a small space in a distribution center domestically in the US? Do you plan on shipping from your home country, right? How do you plan on handling operations? What about customer service? Right? Is customer service going to be on the hours of how you're operating in your home country, or your customer service going to be operating on US domestic hours? Important things to understand, right? Certainly when you're taking a look at things like, your website, your conversion rates, right? Making sure that languages are interchangeable, making sure that currencies are interchangeable, and starting to develop an approach towards things like reverse logistics. How, in fact, do you plan on receiving your goods back if, for example, your distribution center is in your home country versus at a domestic 3PL in the United States? So logistics on customer service and shipping, also extremely important. All right, guys, that's all for me on international expansion in 2022. Remember, it's the cultural context. It's understanding how you relate boots on the ground. And then it's also building up your operational infrastructure to be able to fuel that customer service and to also be able to fuel the energy that you're going to be putting behind those ads, the energy you're putting behind these influencers, the energy that you're putting behind all of these things have got to be supported by the right infrastructure. All right, guys, if you're interested in launching domestically in the United States, please feel free to send us an email at hello@scalingretail.com. I have the privilege of co-CEOing brands internationally, from Shanghai to Tanzania to Nigeria. It's been an incredible career for me to be able to usher brands to the next level of growth, of scale, and helping them set up their P&Ls and operations. So send us an email and we'll talk to you soon. Bye.